Now, as a third culture kid, the grass is always greener on the other side. And the second the plane touches down, I miss German chocolate, and I miss like Vienna coffee.
It's Expat Life Germany, the podcast about life in Germany as seen through the eyes of outsiders. And my guest in this episode is someone that I wanted to interview right from the day I started the podcast. Even before, actually. When the podcast was just an idea in my mind, I wanted to get this guest on. He is Travis J. Dow. He was born in Oregon. He spent some childhood years in Bavaria and later on moved to Prague and finally moved back to the States where he is now. And the reason he was on my list of prospective guests is that he is involved in multiple podcasts, of which the History of Germany podcast is my favorite. Basically, his podcast starts from the Neanderthals and moves along in time, going through the history of Germany. And it's hugely informative. It's fun to listen to. He's a great podcast host. But that's not the only podcast he does. He has a list of the podcasts he hosts or co-hosts. When he lived in Prague, he was a ghost tour guide for tourists, and those stories inspired him to start the Bohemican and the History of Alchemy podcasts. Then, as I've mentioned, because he's a history buff and he has a knowledge of German language, he decided to start the History of German podcast. He didn't just do it in English, though. He also did a version in German, and later on, he's gotten a Syrian refugee to translate the podcast into Arabic. Then when he moved back to the States, he started a German podcast talking about the history of the USA called Amerikaner für euch, which includes topics like slavery, the civil rights movement, and then also topics like Levi's jeans or Coca-Cola. He's even done a show in Africa, and this is not even the comprehensive list, people. So he's very active in the podcasting world. And so if you go to podcastnick.com, that's podcastnick with a K at the end, .com, you can discover all these projects. I've also put a link in the show notes. And I knew I wanted to interview him, but I kind of decided to procrastinate until my own podcast was more established. It was very much a case of me going, he's a kind of a big deal podcaster. Travis might not say it is, but he's got quite a following, and here I was with a brand new podcast, and I didn't feel like I was able to ask him. But then a friend of mine, Dominic, who's also one of the hosts of a German history podcast called Ach, he knows Travis, and he heard my procrastinating, and he basically just didn't listen to it and put me in touch with Travis. And from there, as luck would have it, I was able to make it to Hamburg to interview Travis while he was in Germany back in November 2019. In our interview, we speak about some colossal life changes. And I mean, I'm not saying that lightly. I mean, Travis has had some colossal life changes happen over the last year or so. And these changes have led him to learning how to make German candy here in Germany after meeting his boyfriend at Podstock, which is a German podcasting festival. I also asked Travis for some advice. Being a history buff and having a knowledge of what's out there with regards to podcasts and so on, I asked him how someone would go about discovering more about German history. And we also spoke about Travis growing up as a third culture kid in Bavaria. Here's my interview with Travis J. Dow. It's a little longer than usual, but there is so much information, so much good stuff that we spoke about that I decided to leave the episode a little bit longer. So enjoy my interview with Travis J. Dow. We're sitting in a hotel in Hamburg.
Which is really cool that worked out.
That is really cool it worked out. Yeah, I had another trip planned, and I kind of shoehorned Hamburg in when I knew that you were going to be around.
This is way better than Skype.
This is better than I whenever I have the opportunity to sit in front of someone and do a live interview, I jump on that opportunity. So this is quite unique. So what do you think of Hamburg? Is this your first time here?
Hamburg is great. It's not so funny enough. I grew up in Munich, and I was in a hotel school when I was 18, 19, and we came here on a field trip. So this is technically my second time to Hamburg.
Okay.
But yeah, so now I've been here like about 2.5 months, kind of off and on since August.
Okay.
Because my boyfriend lives here.
Right.
And I'm supposed to be more in Bremen because I'm learning how. This is like 50 different topics into one, but it all goes together because I'm supposed to be learning how to make candy in Bremen.
Yeah.
Now I'm kind of living at my boyfriend's studio apartment in Hamburg for a bit. and I'll be here until January, and then just kind of exploring the town and taking it easy before life starts again. So,
What do you think of Hamburg?
it's great. I think it's 1.5 million people, sort of, which is it's a smidge bigger than Munich. I guess it's the second biggest after Berlin.
I think it's the second biggest, yeah.
Yeah, and Munich I think is third. So it kind of from the size, it's not too different than Munich, and it's not. And I'm also from Oregon, and it's not that different than like Portland, Oregon.
Okay.
And I lived 10 years in Prague, and it's about that size too.
You've been everywhere, Travis.
But it seems like it's my size city. Like
It does seem like that's where you gravitate towards.
It has a subway, and it's easy to get around, and kind of 20 minutes. I think it maybe took me 16 minutes to get here.
Okay.
From a suburb, so that's nothing really. And just last week I did the hop on hop off bus just to kind of, I think the whole tour is 90 minutes, and we jumped off once or twice to go check out the old harbor, because I'm definitely a history buff, and I was just like, I got to go see the Hanse part of the city, and some of there's the Michaeli, I think, church, which is still bombed from World War II, and go look at that kind of thing, and Old Town and all that, and it's a great city. It still has that nice old German kind of feel. Downtown.
It does.
Yeah.
I really like the downtown. This is my first time in Hamburg, and I took a stroll through town. My very first look around, just to kind of get my bearings and see what's out there. And I was very impressed with what I saw. But what I usually do when I discover a new city is I do that. I just go without a plan. I go and wander around the streets and see what I can see. And then the next day I go back, and then I do a hop on hop off tour. If I got more days than after that, then I'll figure out like I need to go and see
and
that.
then go back and
that.
check that out. Yeah. My first thing was actually I just stepped out of my boyfriend's apartment, and there was a creek. And I just followed that. I kind of looked on Google Maps, and it ended up going right down to Jungfernstieg, which is right here, kind of. And it was like maybe an hour and 20-minute walk. And
Fantastic.
I was like, okay. So now I kind of have a feeling for how far I am from downtown. Like that's where the Rathaus, the courthouse is, or City Hall or whatever. And then I took the metro back, or the U-Bahn back. So then I kind of felt like, okay, now I feel like I know where I am. Yeah. Even though parts were just boring apartment buildings. That
it's
also,
fine.
If it's a brand new city, then I kind of like to see, like, okay, how does the average hamburger live? Like, what does that even mean? And then you kind of get a feel for that.
I love that. I love seeing the things that are a little bit off the touristy track.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah. Tourists can be kind of annoying.
They are a pain in the ass. I'm going to be one tomorrow, but they can be a pain in the ass.
I'm always a tourist, but hey. And I also got to say, it seems to me, I like the people here. So for being 1.5 million, I think it's like I think it's 1.5 or so million. Don't give us too much beef.
Wikipedia, people. We're not going to do the work for you.
For that size city, not like I loved Prague and I loved Munich too, but they just seem like just that much nicer. If you walk into a bar, they're just kind of happy to greet you and stuff, which I don't get the impression. And it's almost more of an American thing than like Munich or Prague would be.
Yeah.
But people are just nice and friendly and happy to help out. And,
yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
One of the things that I realized today that I don't like is Google Maps, because I need it so much. And it kind of ruins it. So like today I decided, I just had a cursory look, and then I decided, okay, let me take a walk and see how far I can get. And then I put the phone in my pocket, and I tried to not use Google Maps. Yeah. And I think I got about 10 minutes. I'm like, no, I need to see where I'm going
if you're downtown,
But I love what you do, like you say, just pick a creek or something like that and just follow it and see where it goes.
In that case, I think I whipped out my phone twice just to see like how far am I... Yeah. Am I still? Are we talking like 5 miles or 10 miles? That kind of thing. Yeah. But life has changed.
It has.
Let's see. I moved to Prague in 2005, and I still had a map, paper map in my pocket. Yeah. And that was kind of weird, because if I really wanted to get somewhere, like if it was a job interview or something that I had to be at a set time, I was kind of checking my map every street corner. Like, did I take a wrong turn? Because same as Hamburg, the streets are not parallel. Old Town is evolved out of a medieval city, and even if it was destroyed in the war, they rebuilt
the streets
those
are still the same, right?
Yep. Yeah. So you're like, oh, it's 3 blocks up. No, it's not. It's 2 blocks and kind of wander off that way, and a slight left, and that's kind of the way it is now. I feel like even just here, I knew it was around the corner, But I'm like, well, I might end up going through the park, so I better have it on in my pocket, you know.
Exactly.
So
yeah, that sucks, but that's the way it is. But just like you said, when we did our first international trips, my wife and I, back in 2004, we went to London, then we went to a few other countries like Holland, and back then we were also just using maps. We were just wandering around using maps, and if you got lost, you got lost, and it was so great in a way. It's kind of liberating. But I'm not saying Google Maps is bad. It's just sometimes it's great to switch it off.
In Munich and Prague, you can kind of, I guess any major city, I don't think this way anymore. But it'd be like, okay, where's the river?
Yes.
And then,
try the ocean.
Am I going up? Exactly. So am I going uphill? Am I going downhill? Or you're like, where's the sun? Now it's kind of like, I'll just wander for a couple hundred yards and then check again.
Yeah.
But yeah.
You said you've recently moved to Oregon. You've been going through some life changes, you could say, in the past with career changes.
Should we talk about that for a second?
Should we? I feel like we need to talk about that for a second, Travis, because I think there's a lot of interesting. I don't think anyone has this many stories happening in their life at the same time. So, you tell me how it's ended up that you're in Germany right now, because there's a story behind it.
All right. So that does. I do have to kind of like back up and talk some background for a second. So I was married to a great Costa Rican woman for 10 years, but our marriage wasn't working out, and we got divorced. Well, actually, very recently is when the paperwork finally came through. But we decided to get divorced last year, and in this time, kind of in that depression of all that happening, I got fired a couple of times.
Jesus,
a couple of times,
timing, right?
all within 1 year. So I quit one job because they canceled my products, and then got fired from the next job within 3 months, within like 2.5 months, something. So I spent a couple of months between those gigs just being unemployed, looking for jobs in Silicon Valley, which there's jobs in Silicon, like I'm a technical writer by trade, and there are jobs in Silicon Valley. But still, just a couple of months of being unemployed, not knowing what the next step is going to be.
Your mindset must have been pretty messed up.
It's just not going through the divorce at that time simultaneously. And then got another really great job, but just I wasn't there, mentally. And it was right when I'm signing the divorce papers was the month I started. And that lasted about 6 months. And so, in June was Podstock, and Podstock was somewhere near Hanover or Hildesheim. So I was out in the middle of the woods, but basically Hanover, Hildesheim. And just the coolest people, just super chill, pretty liberal folk. And they had 2 stages, one outside and inside, and then just people doing live shows. And it could be like I talked about Fanta, the history of, Fanta and Coca-Cola and that kind of thing, while knitting on stage. And other people were talking about like data, like cybersecurity and data protection, or my now boyfriend was talking about like his, being transgender and stuff, and here I'm just talking about like Fanta and World War II, like soda in World War II, and Podstock was 3 days, and then I decided, I'm gonna go up to Bremen for a couple of days just to meet some other podcasters, like Gefährliches Halbwissen and a couple of those guys. Who I've collaborated with, and I was like, I'll go meet them in person, just out of the blue. So I'll fly in and out of Hanover, and get an Airbnb those days, but then otherwise just go up to Bremen, and then I was out there. So I shouted out on my podcast like, hey, I'm looking for a couch, a couple months in advance. I'm looking for a couch in Bremen if anybody has a couch. And there was one guy that just he sent me one picture once, or contacted me once, and sent me a second picture now of like a guest bed with his Rottweiler on it. And he's like, I got your couch, buddy. And I'm like, yeah, you do. And so I called him up just to kind of see, because I didn't know who he was at all. Yeah. Turns out he listened to all my episodes, so he knows my whole life story.
All right.
And so I called him up just to kind of see, like, can you tell if someone's a serial killer on the phone?
That's what I was about to ask. Right? Like, is there ever a point where you're thinking, like, could this be an obsessed fan?
Yeah, like, no, but part of the reason was he was pretty chill. Like, he sent me a Facebook friend request just so he could tell me one thing one time, and then he left me alone for 6 months.
Okay.
Right. And so because of that, I was like, okay, so he's all right. He's not crazed or anything. And we talked on the phone, and he seemed pretty relaxed, pretty normal guy. And so I show up, and this guy has kind of a setup. Like, it turns out he lives. So his dad lives there, and his brother lives there, and they're kind of on this compound, and he has his own. He takes his Rottweiler on a walk through his own personal forest, like he owns a forest.
Yeah, a lot of Germans do actually, which is surprising.
And I was kind of like, oh wow, this is interesting. And then he's like, yeah, and tomorrow I'll show you the factory. And I was like, but so what do you guys do? And he's like, oh, we make candy. And I was like, oh, that's cool.
Okay.
He's like, yeah, that's cool. And I was like, I didn't know you didn't know. So the next day I got a tour of this pretty decent sized candy factory. There's kind of like 3 shop floors where they do kind of, you could tell where they started making one kind. Now they do a different kind. And then they bought bigger machinery over there in the 3rd room. And then they got a 4th room for like chocolate and fudge and roasting almonds and all these things. And then there's, a huge warehouse with sugar and flavors and all these things. And, I was like, oh, this is cool. And I kind of stood around there for a day. And we got along great. We were instantly talking history and, like talking crazy. Like,
because he's already, he's interested in that stuff because he's listened to all the podcasts.
So he's known all my episodes, all the History of Germany episodes, all my American episodes. And so we got along great. We were talking like crazy book ideas and let's do this and this. And so even when I went back to the States, we were talking almost daily, like on the phone, chatting and definitely chatting. And he'd send me the pictures of his forest and I'd be like, I wish I was there, and tell me if some machinery broke down in the candy factory. And when I could tell that my job wasn't going well, he could tell in my voice that I wasn't happy. And he's like, listen, worst case scenario is you get on a plane and you come back to Bremen and I'll teach you how to make candy. And then you go back to Oregon and you make candy, and I'm like, all right, dude.
That's crazy.
That's crazy.
It's a little crazy.
But then as the weeks progressed, I was like, hey, man, so were you serious about that? Because I think I might get fired. I'm not sure I'll make it past the month. And he was like, no, I wasn't kidding. Like, yeah, I got your room. I got, you can be here as long as you want. And come by for, 6 weeks to 3 months or whatever. And we'll talk the book project. We'll do all these things. So I was like, okay. And then I think 2 weeks later, I was like, hey, so it happened.
About that candy thing.
About that candy thing. So should I click on I'm about ready to buy a plane ticket. Like, were you kidding? And he was like, all right, well, call me back tomorrow and let's look at flights, like for real. And so I bought a flight for now in October for 3 months. So I still have a Czech permanent residency and all that. Like, so I can be in Europe as long as I want, basically. So I bought a plane ticket for now for 3 months and then another one for April for like World War II reasons. We want to go stand on a battlefield on a certain date, and get a look at something. So I got those going. And then in this time, I was moving from California to Oregon, packing up all my stuff. And this whole other thing was happening, which is my boyfriend. So at Podstock, we didn't talk a lot, but there was this guy that he did a stage show like the first night I was there, and I was just impressed with this guy. Like, he is very impressive. His whole story and his whole just personality and everything. He's just highly entertaining and all that. And I think we talked like twice. Like, I bummed a cigarette off him one time just to have an excuse to talk. And one time I bumped him. I was like, hey, Toby, when are you going to come visit me in California? And he like lit up and was like, oh, well, whenever Trump's not your president, basically, And that was it. And then I went on my way. Yeah. And by chance, I was waiting. I was already like in Frankfurt, I think, flying home. So the second stop. And I was, thinking about what podcast to download. And right there, like at that time, he texted me on Twitter and was like, hey, I didn't see you at Podstock to say goodbye, because I was like hiding in a room knitting, just like, I don't know, But, and I was like, oh, yeah, okay, well, bye. And then just because of that, I was like, oh, yeah, I'll listen to his podcast. And I downloaded like 16 episodes out of 50 or whatever. And I had a 8-hour flight and just kind of fell in love with the guy. Like, he has an amazing story. He's a trans man and he's documented his whole transition in German on a podcast.
What is that podcast called, by the way?
What's in Your Pants? It's in German. Now, he does have an English YouTube channel, so and he's Toby McMill on YouTube. So, if you're curious.
Links in the show notes as well. Definitely check it out.
And I just interviewed him like 2 days ago, so you could link that too. Because then he kind of tells that story in English too. But yeah, his YouTube channel, he kind of checks in every once in a while, whereas the podcast, it was every 2 weeks. And it just, from thinking about going on testosterone to, in Germany, you have to like talk to psychiatrists and everything and get these like evaluations, and it's the whole ordeal.
Wow.
To like his official name change, to his operations, and it's all within like 3 years. So it's just this crazy ride. And
so he did the podcast from when he decided, or was it even from before that? Like, when he was...
like the day he decided, basically. Because he was in a household where they were podcasting, and he was like, "Hey, should we document this as we go? I'm about to go tell my mom, kind of thing. I'm about to go out myself at work." So from the very beginning, how did the first outings go to all that? So it's just an amazing podcast anyways. It's pretty unique as far as I know, as far as like as it's happening. So it's all fresh. So sometimes he has really bad days and sometimes he has really great days. But then so what'sinyourpants.de is the podcast. And so I kind of binged that, and fast forward like a month, I was about to put my microphone in a box to move to Oregon, and I'm like, well, before I do that, let me just send them an audio commentary. Like, Germans are really sweet. They kind of send each other postcards, and they just record a quick little message and be like, "Hey, I love your show, man," and greetings from California or whatever. Very German, Grüße aus California. Yeah. And I've done that a couple times, and I was like, okay, well, before I pack up my microphone, and who knows when I'll see it again in Oregon and unpack everything, I had kind of a to-do list, like I was going to record an episode on the Alamo in German, and one more thing on German history or whatever, and then I was like, and then a couple audio commentaries, and I sat down to record his, and it ended up kind of being a like declaration of love. Like, really? I didn't like think about it, but I was kind of like, hey, so I love you guys' show, but I have to take a break every 2 or 3 episodes because I keep falling in love with Toby. And and I'm like, and send, and I'm like, okay. And then he replies like immediately, and he's like, so really? Like,
about these messages, Travis.
About this. And from then on, we were like texting nonstop. Like that day, I think it just, I kind of was procrastinating my packing because we're just talking on Twitter. Yeah. And then after a couple of weeks, we switched from like Twitter to, after 1 week was like, I'm trying to think when our first Skype conversation was, but like maybe within a week, we started Skyping and switched over to Telegram or whatever, or WhatsApp or whatever. Pretty quickly, I think within 2 weeks, we were like, so we both hate long distance relationships. So we kind of want to know, like, is this worth it or not? Yeah. Like, is there anything there or not? So I bought another plane ticket to go to Hamburg for a month because I said, well, listen, I'll be in Germany anyways, beginning of October for 3 months. Yeah. So, if this works out, we can do that then. And it turns out like this was in July. End of July, and we're like, no, October's too far away. Like, I should come now. So I bought another plane ticket for the middle of August for a month. So middle of August till middle of September. Yeah. And so we figured it out. Like, we figured it out like in a very German organized way. We had like a topic list of like, so how do you feel about this? And so because of that, then I had this crazy experience of like, I've never identified as gay, and I've never
never before.
Yeah, never. Like in high school, I was kind of like, when I was in high school, I went to high school from like 96 to 2000, and probably if I'd have known that there's a such thing as like non-binary, and then people have kind of refined the terms over the years. Like I might have gone a different road as far as like sexual identity, but there wasn't, and so I didn't. And I always had girlfriends, and I married a woman for 10 years. And in retrospect, I was like, well, I married a tomboy, and my girlfriends were kind of like, well,
so they will know. They're like,
oh yeah, they would all tell you. They were like, duh.
So coming.
Yeah, like they all kind of like, none of them were surprised. My ex-wife just rolled her eyes when I told her. But so really quickly, I had to like tell my parents and tell my brother I started with my brother and then parents and then close friends, because I knew like 2 weeks into this month in Germany, I'm going to tell the world on like Facebook and Twitter, and I don't want my mom and dad to figure out on Facebook and Twitter. So So I told Toby, I'm like, hey, so I kind of had to call you my boyfriend yesterday because just for practical reasons, like, and he's like, okay, but like literally it was like moving very fast. And then even now it's like, well, if you want to come to Oregon, like the easiest way is a fiancé visa. So like we got to figure this out for real. So that's kind of what we're doing now. And but yeah, I mean, so I was here already a month just to kind of figure that out. Went back to Oregon for 2 weeks, and then came back and here I am.
It was very confusing for me because when I approached you to do this interview to ask if you would do the episode, it was about
that was like
July or July. June, yeah. I think it was
so
June.
Much happened
so I said to you, I want to talk to you about something, and then you said I've got a secret project happening, which was the candy.
Candy thing.
I didn't know that at the time.
Yeah.
And you said Bremen in October, so I was like, okay, October, we can do October. And then somehow things just we stopped talking for a while.
Yeah.
And then
because I had a lot. Yeah, I was moving and everything.
Tons of stuff happening on your side, tons of stuff happening on my side, and then I came back to you. I think in August or September. And I said, what's happening? You're like, I'm in Hamburg in November. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
Okay, so
because I was probably in Hamburg when that happened, and then I'll be back in Hamburg in November. Yeah.
So
so I'm learning how to make candy, and we've already. So Toby and I have like destroyed. Even Toby came up to Bremen, stood around the factory. I was there for a week and a half. Also like roasting almonds and stuff, but mostly like traditional German hard candy, and in a couple different variants and techniques and all that. And then we went back to Hamburg from Bremen and like destroyed Toby's kitchen with this
making candy.
Yeah, gooey, syrupy, sugary mess. And we've done a couple of batches that turned out great.
Yeah.
So now I can see myself doing it. So now, and we, tiny batches are hard because difficult to do because the sugar dries so quickly, and but now I can. Okay, if I was dealing with a couple of pounds, then my confidence level is pretty high, and so now. I already know what equipment I need and what where it is and how much it'll cost. And
that was my next question, because now your plan is to go back to Oregon and basically set up a candy factory. Like you want to do this properly.
I'm hella excited about that because I'll mention my GoFundMe at this point. There is a GoFundMe, and people have already been kind of generous and have helped out. And then Germans don't have credit cards a lot of the time, so they're like, "Do you also have PayPal?" I'm like, "Yeah, I also have. Here's a link." I think there's links to all that front and center on podcastnik.com.
Yes.
But hey, maybe you'll add them to the...
And they'll be on the... This is going to be a long show notes.
A lot of show
notes.
This
is going to be like chapters of show notes here.
Yeah.
But yes, GoFundMe will be in the show notes.
I do have a business degree. And so finally I'm kind of like putting this, making a business plan just for myself, because I'm trying not to go into debt to do this. I'm trying to lower the risk as I go. But my buddy has a country store right next to a national park or a state park, maybe Silver Falls in Oregon, and it's a beautiful place and a beautiful store. Yeah. And I can just stand there and make candy in front of tourists, basically.
That's a good idea.
And live in a trailer, like my brother has a trailer.
Dude, you're gonna be living the dream.
Yeah.
So you're gonna bring the German aspect into the marketing? Are you saying, is it traditional German style of candy? Or
So I think that's the direction I'll go. There's some things... So when I've been digging into it, some of the machinery I might... So if I actually get a couple grand down the road, right now it's all handmade. Basically no machinery, just pots and pans and, I'll weld some machinery basically when I get back. But I've been looking at like Victorian era rolls and presses and those kind of things, which you can find in the States. They're just kind of antiques and this and that. So then I would, depending on what brand that is, I would market it that way for those particular candies.
That would be cool.
Certain things go straight back to the way that you'd originally manufacture like lozenges, which were sold in apothecaries and pharmacies in the 19th century, which come out of France. So I would go ahead and call those French hard candy or whatever, or French lozenges. With honey and lemon, and so like if you have a sore throat, like go that direction.
Yeah. What I'm loving about this is you're taking your
but I love the history.
Passion.
I love the history.
Passion, like the Victorian stuff.
So the stuff I'm learning in Bremen is I'll call those German hard candies.
That's amazing.
And the roasted almonds. Like I know them from Oktoberfest, and Toby is like, you're not calling them Oktoberfest almonds. There's like this North German, South German, rivalry going on. But yeah, so of course, I'm like taking Oktoberfest almonds. Sorry, Toby, and selling them in Oregon.
You said it on a podcast, Toby. It's permanent. It's done.
It's done now. Oktoberfest style almonds, and they, of course, are delicious. And when I smell them, they remind me of my childhood because we went to Oktoberfest every year.
Yeah,
and so yeah, it's just I grin every time I talk about it because I'm just so excited to.
Yeah, your excitement is actually palpable. It's
and I wasn't excited about going to work and staring at a monitor for 10 hours a day. And
no, sometimes you need that change. It's sometimes feels like you're getting kicked in the ass, but actually what's happening is you're being pushed into a good direction. I think it's good that you're taking the courage to do this. Like it's you coming across to Germany, you're learning this. It takes a lot of courage basically to do that.
It is an adventure. I've always been the adventurous type. When I moved to Prague with a return ticket for 3 months, kind of like now, and I had 2 nights in a hotel booked, and then I came to Prague. I didn't have an apartment, I didn't have a job, and I went to the receptionist at the hotel and was like, hey, if you would look for an apartment in Prague, where would you go? And she's like, expats.cz. She wrote it down, and I went up to my hotel room, and and what's the Wi-Fi password? Yeah. And I went up, and first apartment I looked for, just didn't even think about it, just, yep, that's good, that's a room. Overpaid a little bit, and it turned out there was 6 colleagues. It was like 2 apartments stuck together, so 2 kitchens, 3 bathroom kind of thing. 4 of those colleagues were English teachers. So it was like an Irish guy and a lady from New Zealand and French, German, whatever, and they kind of cycle through. And I was like, hey, so how would I go about it? They're like, you could probably teach English or German, especially if you speak German, you could probably teach German. And so I was like, how would I do that? And they're like, oh, take a TEFL, like teaching English as a foreign language certificate for 1 month. And I was like, but that costs €1,000. That's like all my money, And so I just I made that happen, and I ended up staying for 10 years. So if there's, some people call it stupid, and I wouldn't disagree with that assessment, but I've always felt like, you only live once, and life is so short, you can't.
And look at how much it's enriched your life, those kind of snap decisions, because it's led you down a path that has been infinitely more gratifying to you.
It's impulsive in a way, but then I feel like all my friends would disagree with this assessment, but I feel like then I take a step back and I kind of then I go, well, could this really work? Like, and then you just can't be afraid of failure. I'm like, even if I fail. So in Czech Republic, I thought, well, worst case scenario is I sleep it's summertime, it's not wintertime. Worst case scenario is I sleep under a bridge for 3 months, and then I come back and have one hell of a tale before I go on to get a master's degree or something with a lot of student loans. And now it's kind of the same way. Now I know, like if I go on Twitter and I say, hey, I need to couch surf for 3 months, that's my worst scenario. Yeah. Like, that's my worst case, which is awesome. Yeah. So I feel very privileged and fortunate to have that, and that's through podcasting. Yeah. So I can go back to Prague. I'll be with my podcasting buddy, Pete. I'll be sleeping on his couch for 10 days, and we'll catch up on projects and all that stuff. By the way, I also got to plug his new show, Past Access. Like, it blows my mind because he kind of does this. This is how far we've come. So he goes to Stockholm, or he goes to Barcelona, or he's from Washington, D.C. and Atlanta. And so he went to Baltimore and D.C. And then he's in a wheelchair. And our adventures for Bohemican we would jump in his car and we would drive to the nearest castle for the weekend, and we'd see how far we could get. And we would ignore signs and ignore yelling Czechs like, ne můžete. And we're like, sorry, don't speak Czech. And park right up to and put like the wheelchair stickers are everywhere. And then just see how far, like how many courtyards we could get through. And the first set of stairs, he's like, okay, it's on you, buddy. And he'd hand me his camera, and I'd go take the tour or whatever, and then show it to him later. And we'd talk about it on the show. And we'd go to battle reenactments. There were like firemen helped him out of the mud once. Like 4 people were like, just all these crazy adventures. And maybe a little bit of that rubbed off on me, where I'm like, let's just go see how far we get, Yeah. And now he does these things where it's all the same. He went to the ABBA museum and the Viking museum and all these things. And the latest one was Stockholm. And he just sees how far he can get. And he interview people, and people have been so cool with being interviewed. And he even got like the rights to play ABBA songs on the, they're just like, yeah, go, and all these things. People have been super helpful to him. And then he also gives travel tips on like what to do and what to avoid. Like, oh yeah, this train is super accessible. Okay. You know, they have an elevator, or someone will help you. The Deutsche Bahn, like, oh, maybe call in advance, but there's a number, and then they'll have someone waiting for you.
Useful, practical advice.
Like super practical, and the way he edits it is, you know, I'm actually blown away with like all the little animation stuff.
Yeah, he's good,
because we all sat down and learned this together like 5 years ago, and now, I mean, he's surpassed me, you know, by a mile, and I'm just like, how is this? And people don't realize that he's standing there with a selfie stick. Yeah, you know, like he's by himself. Yeah. Sometimes his son, who's like 14 now, and otherwise it's a one-man show. Wow. And it's like documentary quality. I'm like, why is Netflix not banging down his door? Yeah. You know, like it's just crazy. Yeah. So yeah, Past Access on YouTube.
Check it out.
It's like the most underrated thing on the internet right now. It's like a couple hundred views per video, and
it needs more people.
Each one takes them like 3, 4, 5 months to do. So
I hate to mention the show notes, but link will be in it.
Link will be in the show notes. Yeah, but like I'm proud because it's under the podcastnik.com banner, and I'm like, I can't believe we've done this. It's all Pete, but yeah, it's amazing. Okay. So, yeah.
So where were we?
Anyways. Hamburg, Prague, Munich.
Yeah, where were we? So maybe we can jump topic for a second here. I've got I think maybe a two-part question for you. So the listeners of this podcast are either people who have just moved to Germany and they can't speak a lot of German. But I would imagine that they are, like I was when I came over here, interested in German history. So I come from South Africa originally, and in South Africa we didn't learn German history. We learned about the Third Reich, and that was it, and very, very superficially. And so my first real experience of German history was when I came over here, and then I made a concerted effort to kind of, first of all, check out the Cold War era, and then the Third Reich era, and kind of move back.
I think moving backwards is not a bad idea. Yeah. Like,
it's more accessible. I think it was more accessible for me to start with the Cold War because we'd just been to Berlin and I'd seen where the wall was, and we'd been to Checkpoint Charlie and stuff.
It's living history, and
it's still exactly. Yeah. But how would you, other than listen to your podcast, how would you recommend those people learn German? And then what about people who can speak German or do understand German? What podcasts or what kind of shows do you recommend? So those are that's the two-phase question for you.
Yeah. I think going backwards a good approach. And there are some great podcasts out there, like if that's your approach and you want to learn about, like, there's one called The Eastern Border by Christophs Andressons, and then you kind of figure out communism, and a lot of it's Soviet Union and that kind of thing. But that is important because, so to me, it's always like, if you're walking around a city or you're driving through the country, you kind of want an explanation of what you're looking at. And if you suddenly, like, you can tell when you're in East Germany all of a sudden, and politically, visually, like the architecture, it's still there's still the poorer part of Germany compared to like former West Germany. And why is that? And, you know, so that was kind of my natural. I mean, growing up in Germany, my first interest was some kid at school drew a swastika or something on like my homework or something, or my hand or something, and my mom saw that and was like, "What the hell is that? Like, where'd you?" You know, and I was like 6 or something.
So
like,
what do you know about that?
And just her reaction was like, "Whoa!" I still remember her reaction because it was like such a crazy thing. And she was like, both your grandparents fought this, you know, like, and she sat me down as like a 6-year-old and was like, yeah, you live in Hitler's favorite city. You know, and like, by the way, he was a really bad man, because like none of it, like, it was all new to me.
Sure.
And so obviously you're not going to, so there's the World War II podcast by Ray Harris, which is amazing, like super in depth, maybe too in depth for your average, like what you want to, because he goes like battle by battle, and he does a whole 30-part series on Mussolini and a 30-part series on Churchill.
I started listening to it, but I put it on hold because I think I needed the smaller, the overview first before you really drill down into
then you really drill down. I kind of think what's good to know is go listen to, there's also a thing called a Cold War podcast, which I think is also with Ray Harris. And then Jamie Redfern has done things on certain aspects, like the 30 Years War. Yeah. So that's another one, is like, why Europe is the way it is because of the 30 Years War. Yeah. Like, so if you've never looked into that, like, look into that.
And that was insane. Some of the things that happened in that war was
the whole mercenary, because it was like 10% of the whole population died, but in Germany, it's more like 30 to 50%. In Czech Republic, too. Like, all the battles were fought here, and because it was mercenaries, they had no loyalty, and they had no, like, discipline, and, it's just, so they just murder and rape a whole village, and the village is gone. Like, in some ways, it's more brutal than World War I and World War II, and that's hard to, especially for Germans, like, in Germany. And so that's kind of crazy. And then the whole medieval period, like, there's history of the Crusades, that's kind of going back a bit, but sometimes you might hear like political rhetoric of like why some Germans are grumpy that there's so many Turks here or something. And when I grew up, I was an immigrant. It's weird for an American to say they're immigrants because like Brits and Americans call themselves expats.
Exactly.
Because we're never immigrants. We're expatriates. I still always had that American passport.
That's something that bugs me about my choice of title for this podcast.
Well,
I'm like, because I didn't give it much thought. I just kind of had a definition in my brain, but only afterwards when I started looking into it, I'm like, wow, there is a lot of loaded language here.
But we're not always self-aware enough to realize that. No. Like Germans at some point asked me, like, why are you guys expats, but that guy's an immigrant? And I'm like, well, because I'm an American. Oh,
wait
shit.
A moment.
Yeah, damn it. Yeah. No good reason, sir. No good reason. Because I considered myself, like, I immigrated to the Czech Republic. I was going for my citizenship. I figured I'd retire there. So why would I keep calling myself an expat? But anyways, So like me growing up, my friends were a lot of times like Iranians and the Turkish folk in class, and not always the Germans. Which is, if you're just a German growing up in Germany, that's not the case. Like people are still kind of segregated here, just by clique, and it just happens to, it just falls that way. I don't think it's intentional. I don't think it's like a systemic racism or anything like that. It's just kind of like you migrate towards your culture group, and I just migrated towards, I was not German, and so the other non-Germans were like Germans of color or whatever. I think I wish there was a podcast on that. Like maybe I should do that.
You should do that.
Germany is like the Gastarbeiter, like the guest workers in the 70s, like the Turks that came over, and then the Iranians and their, and like Roma and Sinti, like they've kind of been oppressed over the years, and you still hear that in schools, like some teacher treating a Roma differently than the white German kids or Czech kids. Start with, so that's how I would start, is like, what do you look at, and then where do I get information on that? And in that case, the buzzwords are the Cold War, like immigration in Germany. And if it's not a podcast, it's, just Google it and look at news articles, or the Wikipedia page on like Turkish minority in Germany is a lot of information there. And then go backwards. Like, I love the 30 Years' War. Like, history of alchemy is kind of that's the golden period. Right before the 30 Years' War is that early modern age. If you wander around Prague, that's kind of what you see. Before the war, if you wandered around Munich or Hamburg or Berlin, you would see a lot of that, like from the 17th century to the 19th century, and that's all gone now. But like the Hofbräuhaus and all that, kind of like medieval, it's just so much history was lost that is still there in Prague. But in Czech Republic, that's a great example. Like Czech Republic, you would see a communist building, like the police station might still be a communist building. And you can totally tell. When I moved there, it was like you could still see where they had removed the red star and put like Polizia or something there.
I think there's one or two examples in Berlin of buildings that you can actually see that where the old communist insignia was.
And in Germany, they've done maybe a better job of trying to hide the fascist. The Third Reich, but if you know where to look, or
you can see it.
Yeah, some locals will point it out, and you can definitely see it. And there's whole villages. There's whole villages that were built in the 30s, like these model towns. And then next to that, in the Czech Republic, might be, or even here, depending if it's a smaller town, there might be some Fachwerkhaus from the Middle Ages. The wooden frame house, and then and the cobblestones might be from the 13th century or whatever. So I kind of just want to go through town and just kind of be able to know what I'm seeing.
And it enriches your experience of a place, because just with my walk through Hamburg,
as a history nerd, I think so.
But I think even just as someone who may not be that interested in history, I walked through Hamburg and I was just like you were saying, with the way that the town streets have formed, the shape. Why is it like that?
That evolved around the horse market,
It just enriches your experience of a place when you discover it.
Yeah, I'm a map nerd. I love looking at old maps and be like, okay, this used to be the cow market, and this, and sometimes it still has those names.
Okay, so for people who can speak a bit more German, what are good German things that you can recommend?
In German, well, das Ach you mentioned, but those are like small stories.
They kind of pick like humorous, strange and weird tales.
My
from
podcast,
history.
I'm stuck in the Middle Ages. So now we try to jump around because otherwise, if I go chronologically, I'll never leave the 13th century. Like it's just, in fact, the fact that we got that far, because I went from like Roman, like Celts to Romans to Germanic peoples. It was like, oh, I guess I'm here for a year now because that's a whole nother. That is kind of interesting to this day. The like rivalries. If you head south, there's different food up here than what I grew up with. Like Bavarian cuisine is different than like Northern German cuisine for sure. Yeah. And there's a thing called like the Weisswurst equator or the Weissbier equator, and there are rivalries between them. And you could go back and listen to my the tribal history of Germany of like why the Swabi hate the Bajuwari and the I guess it was like Angles and Saxons especially, and the Franks kind of came over. Yeah. That still exists. Like, why does Germany hate France? Oh boy. Well,
how much time have you got?
It goes back to the Romans, and I mean, it really does go way back. But there's cultural divides that, like, even in America, even if you think like North, South, or something, or East Coast, West Coast, it is nothing compared to like 2 villages over where they will never drink your beer and you'll never drink their beer because it's like a feud that has been going on for 1,000 years.
Yeah, I live rurally in middle Franconia, and I
definitely
see that
perfect
from village to village. The beer is a big deal. Like you don't go to your you got to be careful what you drink.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
Everything is swill except for the beer from your hometown. The sausage will be different. The cheese will be different. It's hard for. Yeah, I mean, other like English listeners know exactly what we're talking about. Like, some old communities in Wales where they're like, I remember this cheese that died out 2 generations ago, and now it's gone forever. That's kind of happened. That happened in East Germany a lot because communists didn't encourage it, and then when West Germans came over, they just all the honey brands, or like if you've seen Goodbye Lenin, they kind of make fun of that. The pickle brands and everything, are just from West Germany. And they were like, well, we have pickles right up the road. What's wrong with our pickles? Car brands and everything. But I'm just get the buzzwords, 30 Years War, Cold War, World War II, and to go down Wikipedia rabbit holes. I wish there was more resources, especially for people coming in. Like that's when I mentioned the Arabic podcast. I was like, these guys just need a lifeline. Like if you're a Syrian refugee,
it's so important for them to understand the culture as well.
Where the hell am I? What And then I'm like, for them, maybe it's good to start in the Middle Ages and to kind of see what they're looking at. What the church means and that kind of thing. The Crusader times and why they might still look funny. They look at you funny if you're wearing like a head covering or something.
Well, one thing that occurred to me while you were talking earlier, with your recent changes, why have you decided to stay in Oregon and not come to Germany? I mean, you seem to have an affinity for Germany somehow.
Yeah. Okay. I did think about it. In fact, Toby and I talked about it a long time, or even just go back to Prague, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Part of it is that my family all lives in Oregon, and we were all spread out. My dad and my little sister lived in Munich for years and years, and they just moved back a couple of years ago. And my brother has his mechanic shop in Portland, and I just kind of miss that they were all spread out. My brother was in Munich or in the Bay Area in California and this and that, but they all kind of went back to Oregon, which is where I was born and my brother was born. And that's a whole nother topic is what's a third culture kid? But I definitely identify, if you Wikipedia third culture kid, I definitely have always identified that. Basically what it is, if you're uprooted a lot, then like I have more in common with, say, those Iranian kids in school in Munich than I would with the other Germans, or because we both, we're kind of snickering about, making light fun of the German culture.
And you're outsiders as well.
Yeah, where if I'd go to his house, he'd be like, okay, you're not an American right now, because if my parents find out that I'm hanging out with American, and kind of vice versa. Like if I told my mom, like, hey, I'm hanging out with this like Persian kid, he was like, what do you mean Persian? You mean like Iranian? You mean like, well, don't bring him over here. Yeah. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
And we just didn't get it because we're just outsiders in a German classroom, trying to struggle with the language. Yeah. And so I have a lot more in common with them. And I kind of, I don't know if that's always good for me. Like,
Right.
you know, my wife was Costa Rican, and I was like, well, are we going to retire in Costa Rica? Are we going to retire in Prague?
Yeah.
Like, does that mean I have to talk to a Czech mechanic and get ripped off every time? Even though I know pretty damn well, like, I change my own oil, I do my own maintenance, and I'm going to get ripped off just because it's not my native language? Like, really? So I kind of made the choice, especially after Silicon Valley. Like, California was home, but it wasn't home. I mean, it wasn't home. And every time I came to Oregon, I was like, you know, that is where I went to college and high school, even though not before then and not after then. You know, it's those formative years, and I have really, really good friends that I just have missed for 10 years. And I thought, okay, if I'm going to set up some roots and buy some property or something, then it probably would be Oregon. Yeah. Oregon also, if you've never been, it's just a beautiful place.
Beautiful. The whole Pacific Northwest is incredible.
It's just amazing, yeah. And I think like New Zealand comes close. I mean, there's a couple of spots, or South Africa, you know, comes close. There's just a couple of spots on Earth that are that gorgeous, and not many. Like it's really just one of those spots on Earth. And then you add the mix the fact that I was born there, and I got friends there and everything. My family's all there. My parents aren't getting any younger. So I have this support structure there that I have here in a different way, but not like
it's
family.
Not like there.
Yeah, and it's not the same. So, and I kind of miss it. It's been a draw the last few years to just go back to Oregon and see what it's been like. Yeah. When I lived in Czech Republic, I visited once in 10 years, and I just kind of felt homesick after a while. Yeah. Like, I think there's a 7-year stretch where I didn't go at all. And I just was missing my friends. I'd just only be using Facebook and Twitter to keep in contact with my friends. And I was like, that's just not good enough.
Yeah.
Now, as a third culture kid, the grass is always greener on the other side. And the second the plane touches down, I miss German chocolate, and I miss like Vienna coffee. Even though we have it's just different. Like, I'll miss the Wiener Schnitzel from Munich, not the one that you can get at,
I think that is one of the traits of third culture kids. I've had a few people a few guests on this podcast as well that are third culture kids, and I can see that they are constantly needing the next it's very difficult for them to root down, and if they are, they're traveling a lot at the same time, and it's a lot easier for them to make a move.
So ideally, I would like to, you know, come visit Germany or Czech Republic twice a year minimum, and like for a month at a time or something. And in Silicon Valley, or any American job, you only get 2 weeks vacation. Yeah, and a lot of times it's 1 week the first year, and then you really fight for it. And that's just incredible to me. I just couldn't believe it. Like Germany's 6 weeks, Czech Republic's 5 weeks. Yeah. And by the way, if you need unpaid leave or anything, that's fine. Where in America, it was like, if you can leave for a month, that means you're probably replaceable. You know, I mean, that's, and they would tell you that.
And they can fire you far easier in America. Oh, yeah. Well. It's just like, it's crazy.
Yeah. But I mean, you know, you go to the States and it's just really locked down. Like insurance is an arm and a leg, and then it still costs money to go to a doctor. And you only get those 2 weeks vacation. And I just kind of feel like, boy, it would be nice to come over to Germany, you know, and get that German beer and chocolate and whatever a couple times. If I don't speak German that's why I started podcasting. Is the second I moved to America, I was like, I got to start a German podcast because I'm going to go crazy. In Czech Republic, I had a German boss. In fact, I did in America for a while too, and we had our one-on-ones in German every time. So I was like, "Oh, Gott sei Dank!" And he was so happy too because he could speak German to his wife and kids. But then that's it. And so he'd come in and be like, "Endlich!" You know, and we'd just go off. And
so your dialect in German is actually Bavarian as well. Can you speak?
So I try really hard not to. When I didn't know it was until I was like 18, 19, and then I started to hang out at hotel school. There was friends that came from like Allgäu and Baden and Schwaben, Aljovia, Baden and Swabia or whatever they call it in English. And they would bully me, in a friend, poke, make fun of me pretty hard for every single Bavarian word I said or Bavarian phrase. Yeah. And so I cleaned it up pretty quick. Right. And up here, I'll be in with Toby's friends, and they're like, one of them will pull me aside and be like, "Stop saying gel," or stop saying There's certain things. I'm like, "Oh shit, am I even?"
Is that Bavarian?
That's hella Bavarian, yeah.
Okay, you see, I live in Bavaria, so I hear a lot of that. The gel.
Yeah. In Franconia and Franken, you'll definitely hear that. Yeah.
And people up here actually recognize. First of all, that I'm not a native German speaker, but that I am living in Franconia because I guess a lot of the words that I use are.
Franconia has a really really strong accent, like really distinguish. Like
I still can't. Like, if people speak in proper Frankish to me, I can.
So I
follow.
I do okay, but sometimes I'll ask them to repeat it enough that they slow down sometimes. And but I do okay. But that's one of the most distinguishable ones.
Yeah.
So they'll definitely.
Yeah. And even how they say their T's, it comes like bitter, and bastjo.
Bastjo.
Yeah.
So when I was a kid, so I had teachers that were like super Bavarian, which now that's kind of a dying breed. Like my sister, who's 17 years younger than me, she had to really struggle. If she would leave Munich and go to the countryside, she would get lost pretty quick, like just with the language. Yeah. And then they realized that, and they all kind of clean up their German and will hide German at you. But I had teachers that were just gnadenlos, just like no mercy, just teach.
This is the way it is.
Teach in Bavarian, yeah. And we're proud of their culture and the whole beer garden, Maßkrug kind of culture and all about it. And that's just who they were. And so I didn't necessarily realize. And then I had friends that would even live outside of Munich and come in, or Austrian classmates or whatever, and they really had or one of my best friends was from Passau in grade school, and she had a really strong, like Passau was even a whole different direction of Bavarian, and so she had a really strong dialect, and it took me a while. It's like when I was a kid, I'd have to, like, if we had British friends, and I'd have to be like, what? And they'd be like, pardon? What? Pardon? And then we kind of eventually figured it out. And it was that way with Bavarian too, for sure. And my parents figured it out too, but it was like I was 4 years old when I moved over, and my brother was 2.5, and we just kind of soak it up like a sponge. Yeah. And then you don't realize that you're speaking Bavarian until you're in Berlin and you ask for a Semmel, and they're just like, oh,
what? Come on,
you mean Brötchen, buddy? Come on, or Krapfen, it's a Berliner, and all these things. And so I'm like, I always make fun of Toby. I'm like, I want a Krapfen, and he's just like, oh. Yeah. But he knows I'm doing it on purpose at this point. But still, of course, like every once in a while, especially after 1-2 beers, I'm just
it
like,
comes out the old Bavarian.
Why not get komm schon? And they're like, Travis, I can't take you anywhere. I'm like, what? I'm an American. Yeah, but you don't sound like an American. You sound like a fucking.
Sound like worse. Yeah. You sound worse.
Clean up your shit. So.
All right.
But yeah, so I try to speak High German. I try to just blend in and just not. So I play this game every time I speak German, and normally it falls apart when I say my name. And my game is, how long can I just blend in? And people might think I'm from somewhere, but how long can I just be a German before somebody picks up on my accent? And because my German's I used to not have an accent. German used to be my stronger language. Okay. Me and my brother decided we were just going to speak German. And that's on the way home one day, until we got home and we were like, Mom, Dad, wir sprechen jetzt nur noch Deutsch. And they were like, oh yeah, want to bet? Like,
let's see.
And my parents were very strict that we were bilingual and all that. Okay. They would correct our English. And so German was definitely, because I'd hear it in school, I'd hear it with all my friends. I mean, my brother would speak German, and they're like, but to Mom and Dad, we've got to speak this whole other language.
Yeah, this sucks.
And they wouldn't accept Denglish. So, I'd say a sentence with 2 German words in it, and they'd be like,
I don't understand you.
Yeah, and I was like, yes, you do. It was the most frustrating thing. But of course, in the long term, but it's great, and I appreciate that.
Yeah.
But so now I do have an accent, and I try to get through until I say, like, folg mir bei Twitter. And I'm like, ich meine Twitter.
Meine Twitter.
Mein Tweet-Deck. I'll slip and say some, like, ich bin Podcaster. Ich meine Podcaster. Scheiße. And, but it always falls apart when I say my name.
Travis.
Yeah. So
Travis.
So if I say Travis, so I can be like, I said Travis, give it a little German accent and be like, aber das ist ein sehr amerikanischer, like, this is a very American name. Yeah. So now I've even said, like, ach, meine Eltern, like, so now I have the whole thing where, in German it's like, also, mein Vater hat meine Mutter nicht erlaubt, dass sie mich Elvis nennt. Okay? And like at least my dad wouldn't allow my mom to call me Elvis. Yeah. So, and that's like, I make a joke out of it, and then I move on. And I hopefully they buy it. I kind of look at them,
Oh, they're good. They're taking it.
And then I just keep on. And they're like, well, but then it's like, well, where are you from? Like München, And there's already like, like, your mom's American, your dad's American. I was like, no.
Yeah, they're on to me.
Yeah. So, and as soon as as soon as they figure, wenn ich ertappt werde, like as soon as they figure it out, I'm just like, okay, game's over, or whatever. Yeah.
This is the story.
I was born in Oregon. But I hate that because it's part of your introduction. So like a third culture kid, like I could never just fit in with a name like Travis. Like growing up, it was always like instantly like, or I mean, it was like traumatic at the time. We also moved a lot. And so every time I'd be in the classroom and first day of class, they're like, oh, does anybody not have a German? Which I'm like, why do they make kids do that? It's horrible.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah, you would never do that in America. Yeah. But they're like, does anybody not have a German citizenship? And then people would raise their hand and be like, is anybody non-EU? And I'd be like the only guy. And they're like, and then the teacher would already like, oh, I'm like, you must be the American. And everybody would look at me and like already I'm singled out. I don't blend in. I can't just sit quietly in the back row. And yeah, so that's why I still play this game, because it's like trauma. It was like a traumatizing childhood.
Trying to fit in.
Yeah, and then I go to the Turks and the Iranians, and like we go hang out because we're all weird anyways.
I interviewed someone on this podcast who was Syrian. She was born in Syrian, then moved to Canada, then spent some time in the States, and then went to Japan, and then she studied in Dubai or something like that, and she said introductions are the worst. Yeah. You just want to fit in somehow, and
especially because I remember moving to Germany, but I was so young. I remember because it was traumatic, like going through JFK, like the airports and stuff, and then being dropped off in a daycare where I didn't speak any. I mean, I remember learning German and everything. Yeah. But then, first it was German kindergarten, and then first grade I was in a German school. So you just want to fit. You just want to get over it. You just want to I'm just one of you guys. Like, don't be weird.
Travis, this has been you are one fascinating guy. I will tell you that. I definitely knew, like I said, I wanted to interview for the podcast, and I really appreciate you coming out here and talking and telling your stories. I really appreciate it, especially for me being a new podcaster. Yeah. So I think we've already run through everything that we would want people to find you. The podcast I'll put in the show notes. The GoFundMe I will put in the show notes.
I appreciate that. Yeah. But for all your listeners out there, stay tuned to see how it goes out, how it all works out next year. And I might have some candy for sale. So.
I'll definitely be following your project, Travis. Thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate it.
See ya. All right, that's it. If you want to help Travis out, check out his GoFundMe link in the show notes. And that's it for this week. Thanks for listening. If you want to follow me on Instagram, it's Expat Life Germany. If you want to follow me on Twitter, it's Expat Life DE. There's an Expat Life Germany Facebook group that you can discuss the latest episodes. Music in this episode, theme song by my band, 10 Cent Janes. Other music in the episode, Until the End, by Ryan Anderson. And I will be back in your feeds next week, Monday. Auf Wiederhören.